I lost my job 3 months ago. At first, I thought it would be temporary. I had some savings, a few freelance contacts, and a plan. But savings dried up faster than expected, and every job lead went cold. Rent was 2 months overdue. The fridge was almost empty. I avoided calls from the landlord, thinking maybe I could figure something out. But the truth was, I had nothing left to figure with my boyfriend Tuan was working abroad. At first, he checked in daily. But as my messages turned from casual updates to financial worries, his responses grew shorter. Then they stopped altogether. When I told him about the rent, he said, "I'm trying to save here too. Just hold on." Hold on to what, exactly? The bills didn't wait. The electricity was already shut off once. Mr. Kwan, the landlord, was quiet but observant. Older, maybe late 40s, he kept to himself. When he finally knocked on my door, I braced for a confrontation. Instead, he surprised me. He didn't raise his voice or mention eviction. He simply said, "I know times are hard. Don't stress too much. We'll work something out." He left a bag of groceries the next day. No note, no message, just left it there. I didn't want to accept it, but hunger wins over pride. I boiled the instant noodles and told myself it was just temporary help. He kept his distance after that, no pressure, no comments. Just small kindnesses. A new light bulb replaced. A fixed lock on the bathroom door. All done quietly, without asking. That I told my best friend Han about it. She frowned. "No man does something for nothing. Be careful." I rolled my eyes. "He's just being nice." Still, something about her tone lingered. Maybe it was the way he looked at me too long when saying goodbye. Or how he waited a second too long at the door after I said thanks. A week later, he texted, "If you're ever hungry again, don't hesitate. We neighbors should help each other." I didn't reply. I didn't know how to. Tuan still hadn't responded to my last 3 messages. Even a "busy right now" would have meant something. That I stayed indoors more. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford to go out. Job alerts came in, but nothing matched my experience. My days blurred, waiting, watching the phone, checking the balance in my banking app like it would magically change. It didn't. Then, one evening, Mr. Kwan knocked again. He handed me a container of hot soup and said, "I made too much." His eyes scanned my face. "You should eat. You look tired." I nodded silently and closed the door behind him. I placed the container on the counter, unopened, and stared at it for hours. That I knew the kindness wouldn't last forever. Nothing ever does when you're this far behind. But when you're broke, lonely, and ignored by the one person who's supposed to care, even the wrong kind of attention can feel like relief. I didn't trust Mr. Kwan. Not fully. But I also didn't trust the silence coming from Tuan, or the job market, or my future. Everything felt uncertain except for one fact: I was trapped, and options were slipping away one by one. That I didn't cry. Not that night. I just sat at the edge of my bed with the lights off and phone face down. I kept replaying the same thought: how long before kindness turns into a price? It was quiet outside, and even quieter inside me. The text came in the next morning: "If rent is a problem, I might have a solution." No pressure. It was from Mr. Kwan. I stared at it for a long time before responding with just one word: "How?" He replied almost instantly: "Dinner. Just dinner. You join me tonight, we talk. That's all." I told myself it was harmless. A meal in exchange for a bit of leniency wasn't selling myself. I had to survive. That night, he was polite, almost charming. He talked about his past, his business, how he understood what it meant to struggle. He poured me a drink. I took it out of courtesy. He made no move on me, didn't touch me, just smiled too long, laughed too much. At the end, he said, "This helps both of us." I left feeling confused but relieved. I hadn't done anything wrong, but something felt off. The next day, I checked my rent balance. 0. Cleared. I didn't know if it was a gift, or if that dinner had been a transaction in disguise. I told myself it was a gesture, nothing more. That I hadn't crossed any lines. But my stomach stayed tight all day. Han called. I didn't answer. A few days later, another message, having dinner again with some friends. You'd be welcome to join. Casual. I didn't know how to reply. He followed up, no rent due next month if you do. My hands shook. I sat in silence for almost an hour before typing, okay. There were 3 of them, Mr. Kwan and 2 older men, Mr. Hui and Mr. Bin. They were well-dressed, courteous, overly friendly. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. The conversation danced around business and vague compliments about me, my voice, my presence, my elegance. I laughed when they laughed. Ate when they did. Counted the minutes in my head. When I stood to leave, Mr. Kwan touched my back lightly. Thank you for coming. You made the night better. I nodded. I went home, locked the door, showered for 30 minutes even though there was barely any hot water. The next morning, another transfer, equivalent to a month's rent. No note, just the amount. I stared at the notification, then turned my phone off. For the first time, I didn't text Tuan at all. Han came by unexpectedly. She noticed I had groceries, cleaner clothes. You okay? She asked. I lied. I got some help from a temp agency. Just a few gigs. She looked unconvinced but didn't push. I hated lying to her, but I hated pity more. At night, I kept replaying the dinner in my head. The way their eyes lingered. The tone behind their compliments. I hadn't done anything physical, but I felt used. As if my silence, my company, my smiles were a currency I hadn't meant to trade. But I had. And I wasn't sure if that made me a survivor or something else. Another message. They asked about you. We're meeting again soon. No emoji, no question mark. Just a statement. I didn't reply. The money was sitting untouched in my account, yet I felt broke in ways I couldn't explain. Tuan finally messaged, work's been crazy. Hope you're okay. I typed, deleted, retyped. Ended up sending, I'm fine. He didn't ask anything else. I turned off my phone for the rest of the day. I lay on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't sure where the line was anymore, what I had crossed, what I hadn't. I tried convincing myself I still had control. That nothing had happened unless I let it. But somewhere deep down, I knew control had slipped the moment I replied, okay. The next time he knocked, he didn't ask if I was free, he just said, they're expecting you. I froze. I hadn't replied to his last message, hadn't acknowledged the money, but he came anyway. Just dinner, he added with a smile, like before. I nodded without thinking. Not because I wanted to, but because I was too tired to argue, too uncertain of the consequences if I said no. They were already there when I arrived. Mr. Hui poured wine without asking. Mr. Bin complimented my dress, even though I hadn't changed. Mr. Kwon kept the tone light, talked about business, joked about the market, but their attention never strayed far from me. The air felt heavier than the first time. Their words more casual, their touches more familiar. A hand on the lower back, a brush of fingers across my arm. I stayed still, laughed at the right moments, focused on breathing. When I tried to leave early, Mr. Kwon stood in the doorway. He didn't block me outright, just leaned against the frame with a raised eyebrow. Leaving so soon? We were enjoying your company. I murmured something about feeling unwell. He stepped aside, eventually. I walked home feeling like I'd escaped something invisible. The next morning, my rent balance was clear again. This time, no transfer. No message. Just the number, 0. It felt worse than the money. Like I was now officially owned, no longer even worth the courtesy of pretending this was help. I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour, fully dressed, unsure if I wanted to scream or sleep. Han called again. I ignored it. She came over, uninvited. I didn't answer the door. She stood there for 10 minutes. I watched her from the peephole, tears brimming but refusing to fall. I didn't know what to say anymore. I didn't want her to see what I was turning into. That night, Mr. Kwon messaged again. You were lovely. We'll do it again soon. No question. Just expectation. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone. Sat in silence. The quiet didn't feel peaceful, it felt like pressure. The following week, I avoided everyone. I barely ate. My reflection in the mirror looked distant, unfamiliar. I'd lost weight. My eyes were dull. When had I stopped brushing my hair in the mornings? Tuan finally called. I let it ring out. He followed with a message, I'm worried about you. Too late. He'd been silent when it mattered. I read it, locked my phone, and left it on the table. Mr. Kwon didn't knock that week. But I knew he would again. He always did, and I always answered. I didn't know what I feared more, that he would come back, or that he wouldn't. Every day became a waiting game. Every night, a replay of past ones that I told myself I still had choices. That I could say no. That nothing had happened that couldn't be undone. But my body didn't believe it. My chest felt hollow, my breath shallow. I moved like someone wading through fog. Even when I wasn't with them, I felt watched. Like I carried the weight of every quiet agreement I never actually made. They never said the words, and I never gave full consent, but everything in between screamed louder than any contract that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was disappearing, bit by bit, glance by glance, smile by forced smile. And nobody noticed. Weeks passed, and the messages stopped asking. They just informed. Dinner at 7. They'll be joining. I didn't reply anymore, but I still went. Not out of obligation, but because by then, I couldn't tell if saying no would even change anything. It had all become routine. I'd show up, pretend, leave, and forget as fast as I could. The silence afterward was always worse than the event itself. They grew bolder. The compliments were more direct, the looks less disguised. One night, Mr. Hui whispered, "You're more than just pretty, you're cooperative." I smiled faintly, but my stomach turned. Mr. Kwon acted like he didn't hear it. Or maybe he did, and that was the point. He poured me another drink. I drank it. That's what was expected. That I stopped answering Han entirely. She sent voice notes, texts, even emailed. I archived them without opening. I couldn't bring myself to hear someone remind me of who I used to be. That version of me didn't exist anymore. She couldn't afford to. The moment everything cracked was subtle. Mr. Kwan made an offhand comment about knowing my routine, how I didn't get many visitors, how quiet I was. It wasn't a threat, but it didn't have to be. I went home that night and cried, not loudly, just small, restrained sobs into my pillow until my face went numb. The next day, I packed a small recorder into my bag. I didn't plan it for revenge. I just needed proof, for myself, that I wasn't imagining this. That this wasn't kindness. That this wasn't mutual. That night, I kept it on. It caught more than I expected. Mr. Kwan laughing about keeping things off paper, Mr. Hui joking, she knows what this is. Don't you, sweetheart? I didn't reply in the moment, but I saved the file. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. 3 days later, I sent it anonymously to Mr. Kwan's wife. I found her on Facebook through a tagged photo. I didn't say who I was, didn't explain. Just the file. A few hours later, he knocked. I didn't open the door. He knocked again. Then silence. That was the last time he came. No police. No scandal. Just a vacuum. The rent due notice returned to my door. No more transfers. No more dinner messages. I was invisible again, but this time, I welcomed it. That I sold some of my clothes online, took a shared room with strangers across town. It was loud, cramped, but mine. I started tutoring English online. The money wasn't much, but enough. For now. Tuan called from the airport weeks later. Said he had 2 weeks off, wanted to see me. I said no. He asked why. I just said, I'm not the girl you left here. He didn't ask more. That I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel strong. I just felt empty and tired, but in control, maybe for the first time in months. No more meals I didn't want. No more messages I feared. No more pretending to be okay while waiting for the next quiet transaction. One afternoon, I walked past the old building. Mr. Kwan's car wasn't in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. It looked normal, harmless. Like nothing had ever happened there. But I knew better. That I bought a small notebook later that day. On the first page, I wrote one sentence. Surviving is not the same as living. I didn't know what came next. But I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide it for me. Not anymore.